Hello and welcome to the Business of Story. I'm your host, Park Howell. Question for you. Have you ever stood before an audience, served up a story that you were certain was going to win them over, but it fell flat, deathly flat? No worries, because today we are going to the United Kingdom to learn how to tell stories that connect every time with your prospects, buyers, customers, and colleagues. And you're going to hear about how to do just that from the story spotters themselves, Sarah Jane McKechnie and David Pullan.
But a lot of people need urging.
You actually gave me one of the best pieces of advice, coaching tips, actually, when I first started doing this with you, in terms of that question. Anyone can tell a story, but why is it you, and why does it need to be told right now? So it gives it a purpose, and it makes them invest in how they feel about the story, which will change the language. It will change the energy that they bring to it as well. And there are tricks you can do.
I think as well, the wonderful thing I love about the ABT, just in terms of conversation, or when you really need to connect with an audience or with somebody that you're speaking to, is the and. Is about, I love it because it's about seeking connection, and it's about what can we agree with.
Sarah Jane and David help their clients build powerful connections, and they save great messages from horrible deaths. We'll explore the 4 ways you can spot, shape, and share stories that excite audiences to action. And guess what? They all start with the foundational narrative framework of the ABT, the and, but, therefore, which Sarah Jane and David recently learned about and are now using to great effect. Here are 3 other quick tips from them that you're going to hear to kick off the show. Keep the language simple. If you can't see it, they won't. Look like you want to be there, and be more interesting than a sandwich. That's right. We'll cover all of that and more on today's edition of the Business of Story. Sarah Jane and David, welcome to the Business of Story.
How lovely
Hello.
to be with you, Park. Good morning to you.
Oh yes, it's morning, isn't it, with you? Yeah.
It is. It's morning. It's 17 a.m. here in northern Arizona, and you are coming to us from where?
Where are we? We're south of London. We're in the southeast of the UK.
Yes, in the Ashdown Forest.
Winnie the Pooh country, good storytelling country.
The Ashdown Forest and Winnie the Pooh. Yeah, I mean, you guys are built for storytelling out there.
There's no escaping, Park. There's no escaping.
We live not very far from the Pooh Bridge.
Yeah. So Winnie the Pooh actually was written around here. A.A. Milne lived around here. You could walk to Winnie the Pooh Bridge from where we live.
And like America, there would be nothing but roadside attractions and posters up and whatever. Do you guys bastardize Winnie the Pooh out there like we would do it here?
No.
It's very hidden away. It's a tiny little, you wouldn't even know actually, unless you knew. But I mean, a lot of people do know because they come for that specific reason. But I mean, there are no burger vans there, Park.
Yeah. Now you all run the business storytelling consultancy called The Story Spotters out there.
Exactly.
Can you give us a quick little background on that? And then, of course, we want to dive into your backstory and learn about how you got in this crazy business of business storytelling in the first place. So tell us about the Story Spotters.
Well, shall I take that one quickly?
Yeah,
the Story Spotters, actually, it's interesting. I mean, there's a bit of an ABT around that, if you like. I mean, because for years and years, for about 20 years, we were called McKechnie Pullan Limited. But that sounded like a small-town law firm. And so nobody had a clue what we did. And then suddenly, about a year ago, via various means, actually, we ended up rebranding as the Story Spotters, because what we've been doing for years is story. I mean, ever since both of us were very young, wasn't it? And it's so we do 4 things, really. We help people spot, shape, and share the stories that they need to use to connect either internally or with the market. We help people in terms of the stories that they trigger through their behaviors. So the way they show up either on screen or in the room, what stories do people tell about you because of how you show up? What stories do you get out of other people through conversation? So how do you actually grab those stories from others? And then finally, what is the story you're telling yourself about yourself, which is going to either help or hinder your success? So there's a little box of tricks there. So 4 sides of story spotting.
We will explore that a little bit later, but I'm sorry, Sarah Jane, go ahead.
No, I was the last one. It's the stories in your head. I like to call them the monkeys who are constantly chattering, because we've all got them. We've all got this little chattering in our heads all the time, and we're telling ourselves things. And sometimes we really just need to quieten them.
I had that stupid little chimpanzee jump in my brain and at 2:20 a.m. this morning, and I couldn't shut that little son of a gun up for the rest of the day. So I feel the pain. So give us your backstory. How did you get into this line of work?
Well, it was, some time ago now, about 24 years ago, I suppose. And we were both acting. I had our son, Charlie, and I decided that I didn't want to go on tour with a small child, because I'd been on so many theatre tours with women who had their children and they were having to have nannies and all that kind of thing. And so I thought, okay, if I'm not going to do this anymore, then I need to find something else. And it was at the time when there was an organization that was taking actors into the city in London to help people with their communication, and particularly with pitches and telling the story of the pitch. And I got involved in doing that and absolutely loved it. And so I was doing that for about 4 years, was I? And
absolutely.
then David had been doing some. Well, you tell.
I mean, Sarah Jane had been telling me for years that I should get involved in it as well. I was going, no, I'm an actor. I still want to be an actor. And I was actually doing some work at an adult education college. I'd created a course called Your Voice is the Business, which was a weekend of voice exercises for business people. And it was a terrible course because they're not going to do any voice exercises. I mean, but the one exercise that they really loved was a storytelling course where they told each other's stories back to each other. Sarah Jane eventually got me involved, and very quickly I found myself on a plane to Switzerland working with an organization. And I turned up there and I had no idea what I was doing. There was all this jargon going on that I didn't know what they were talking about. And I remember calling Sarah Jane from the toilet, actually, in the middle of Zurich in this organization, and saying, they're saying all these things. I don't know what they mean. And she said, get them to tell you a story that proves their point. And I did. And the rest is history.
Isn't that funny how that story connected between you and them? So you're in there and they're all pinstriped out, suit and tie. You're feeling like a duck out of water. An actor out here now in Switzerland helping very powerful, sounds like business people. They are just talking nothing but jargon and acronyms, I'd imagine. And so you're like, oh my God, this isn't going to work. And yet it was a story. Sarah Jane's coaching you of have them tell the story that connected your world with theirs, and is going to be what's going to connect their world with that new client.
Well, do you know what, Paul? That Sarah Jane's advice there to me, and actually me saying, I'm not like these people. And she said, and that's why you're there, because you're not like these people. And the stuff that you and Randy have said, actually, about are you talking to the inner or the outer circle? Of course, they were talking very much to their own inner circle. I was representative of the outer circle, and I couldn't have got much more outer. But if they could make it simple to me through story, then there was a pretty good chance it was going to captivate people and win. They did win that one. And as I say, I mean, I got the bug. I got the bug for business storytelling from that.
Well, there's something to be said about playing the fool, and I play the fool all the time. And that is, you as you were mentioning first, you said Randy. That's Dr. Randy Olson, my co-author of the new book, The Narrative Gym for Business, and the gentleman who taught me the ABT back in 2013. And yes, we found that you've got that inner circle where you don't really have to rely on story as much because they're already completely bought in. They get what you can use your jargon and your acronym, all the shortcuts, because they're already on the team. But so many of us are often talking to that much larger outer circle that has no idea, or just a little bit of an idea of what we're talking about. And then there's that little tiny circle outside of that larger circle, that outer circle, and that is the fool. And that's where we can often come in, and anybody listening to this, you can play a very powerful role of that fool, not knowing what's going on. So you get to ask all kinds of questions to unearth the stories that that inner circle needs to tell the outer circle so they get it.
That's a wonderful, wonderful way of putting it. The tiny outer circle of the fool. You know, we've often said that we sometimes feel that we're like the Shakespearean fool, and sort of saying, "Did thou really means to say that, nuncle?" But I mean, it's.
You say that, do you? Oh, right.
I've never actually used that line, no, but.
I can't pull that off with an American accent, but anything British, just give us some more Shakespeare. Were you two in Shakespeare theater, or what was your acting background?
You go first.
There's a lot of touring that goes on in the UK. There is theatres, well, certainly when I was acting, there are theatres in every city. And I would travel from theatre to theatre doing all sorts of plays. And I loved it. Touring around the country was just fantastic. You were actually based, weren't you, at the RSC for a long time?
I did do a lot. I've got to say, Sarah Jane's being very modest here. She shared a caravan with Frances McDormand in a movie once. So she shared with an Oscar winner, and she was in a movie with Shirley MacLaine. So she's being very modest here. I just shouted in tights. I shouted in tights doing Shakespeare at the Royal Shakespeare Company for about 6 years.
So what doing Shakespeare has taught you about working in the corporate world?
Wow, what a great question. Okay, actually, can I tell you, I'm not sure that it's Shakespeare, but there was one incident that happened to me. I was doing Twelfth Night. This was back in the 1980s, I think it was, at Stratford-on-Avon. I'd done this play about 300 times. I was playing a character called Fabian, and it was on Boxing Day at Christmas. And for some reason, I got stage fright. I never got stage fright. I was standing there waiting to go on stage, and my knees went. They were like jelly. And the only way that I could get through it was the monkeys. It was those monkeys in the head jabbering away to me. And the only way I could get over it was by taking a deep breath, but also thinking, how do I want to change these characters? How do I want to change these other characters I'm on stage with? Just take all of the focus off myself, just focus on them. And I think that's something that both of us have taken into the business world is in a presentation or a sales pitch or something like that. It is not a case of the audience and you're not being judged by an audience. You need to almost treat them as another character within a scene who you are trying to change, how they think, how they feel, what they do. So I suppose that's the major lesson I took away from it. It's not particularly Shakespearean, but it's from acting.
I think it's a really important point, though, is that no actor has been in the wings on the first night of a play without actually, wanting to say, I wish I worked in a sweet shop. That's, I wish I wasn't here now, because your stomach is just turning over. And I think that the danger of that is that what happens is when people get very nervous, that they're consumed with the idea of wanting to impress as opposed to seeking to explain. And once you put the focus on yourself, of wanting to impress, then it's a hiding to nothing. But if you take it to the fact that you want the conversation with the audience, and of course, story is the best way to explain things and to connect with an audience. And I think that's certainly what I learned from being on stage, is that whole thing of, just as you were saying, you just have to switch your focus onto, why am I here?
It's not about you.
It's not about you.
And it really comes down to ego versus audience, doesn't it? That when you have those jitters, those weak knees, it's because your ego is totally taken over. Yeah. And what I've learned in many years of presenting, never been in theater, although it seems like that it's, theater quite often when you're presenting, is that when I get those butterflies, I am too focused now on me and looking good and sounding smart and whatever. As soon as I redirect that focus to the audience and tell myself, I don't care if a booger comes out of my nose, if I fall off the front of the stage, if I blah, 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 prattle on, I don't care as long as
Yeah.
I am imparting what I know to the audience and make it about them. And then I find, man, I can get rid of those butterflies by 2/3. And then, of course, once you're in
Yeah.
the heat of war at the first minute or two, and then everything else just takes over and you have great fun with that. Well, let's
Do you know,
talk a
can I
little
just
bit
add something
first.
just very quickly on that part? There's a
Absolutely.
very interesting thing. Just as you're saying that, there's some advice that I often give very nervous clients who are very nervous about presenting, who are nervous about the sales pitch. And I said, become a great storyteller. That's the best way to get over being nervous, because what happens when you create a great, vivid story for someone? You are creating pictures that they are buying into. You are creating the vision that they are buying into, and they are seeing in Technicolor. So yes, of course, they're looking at you, but what they're really seeing is the picture of the past or the future or whatever it is you're telling. So in a bizarre way, by becoming a great storyteller, you get out of the way of your own message, and you don't become the center of attention because your story is the center of attention.
We'll be right back with Sarah Jane and David Pullan. But first, I'd like to introduce a new sponsor to the business of story. It's the world's #1 creative services marketplace called Voices. Now, I'm tickled about their support because early in my advertising career, I wrote and produced hundreds of radio spots. You can hear some of my favorites and the selling storytelling tips that I learned from them on episode number 250 of the Business of Story. Now, every one of those productions is a story igniting the theater of the mind to captivate and convert customers. I had a blast creating them. But it was hard finding the right talent. Back in the internet-less day, I would just scour the local Phoenix market. Then I'd go to LA and other places to find the right voices. It was time-consuming and incredibly expensive. If I had only had an online service like voices.com, my life would have been so much easier and my productions even more powerful. Voices is the world's #1 creative service marketplace with over 2 million registered users. Since 2005, brands like Shopify, Microsoft, GoDaddy, Hulu, Black & Decker, and NBC have used Voices to source the ideal talent for their projects. The beautiful thing is you don't even have to lift your seat. Just a finger to submit your project to Voices. They'll match you with the right talent for your voiceover, audio production, music composition, and translation services with professionals in over 160 countries. And they're fast, turning around your project in under 24 hours if need be. Plus, there's absolutely no risk to you of a production falling flat. Voices uses the exclusive SurePay service, so your funds are only released once the final files have been delivered and you are 100% gleeful over the production. Because the future of work is freelance, Voices is expanding the services offered on its platform to help you meet all of your creative project needs in one single place. So if you're stressed, under the gun, and you want your project to turn out perfectly, but you don't know where to turn, visit voices.com and post your job today. I can't wait to hear how it turns out for you. Now, back to our show. Well, and let's talk about that a little bit in the notes that you sent me leading up to this. By the way, the three of us got acquainted about 2 months ago through the ABT.
Yeah.
I believe I was on an episode, maybe you heard on another podcast, or maybe it was Randy. You guys all got a chance to chat. And then we got on a couple Zoom sessions and just compared notes with the kind of work we're doing. We're both huge believers, of course, in the ABT. And in one of the notes that you sent me is one of your first suggestions is to keep the language simple. Now, the ABT is a structure, a simple structure, but therefore, and a statement of agreement to set the stage. But let's introduce the story tension, the conflict, the problem that our customers are going through, and then the therefore, what our solution is. So in both instances, we are promoting a very simple story structure, but therefore, and you talk about keeping the language simple. Sarah Jane, I'll ask you, isn't this like the hardest thing to do is to keep it simple?
Well, it really is, because I think, and I go back to what I was saying before about, we're desperate to seek to impress.
Yeah.
when actually what we need to do is make it simple and explain so that people understand. And I think that because of the fact that we live, particularly in the business world, we live with so many acronyms and convoluted ways of explaining things and everything, that becomes a jargon within any kind of organization. And it's so easy to just rattle those things out. And we think we're being very impressive when we're doing it. And actually, maybe that's not what our aim is, but it certainly does come out. And the idea, I think, is to literally explain something in words that somebody who doesn't know anything about what you're talking about could understand. If you write something, then I think you can be quite complicated in terms of what you write, because people, you can put much more detail in, because people then can read the first sentence and then they can go away and make a cup of tea, come back again and read it again if they don't understand it. When you are speaking to somebody, you need to be as simple as possible, because you can't put somebody who is speaking on sort of playback with your video. Because you can't stop someone and be like, excuse me, I didn't understand that. Can you start from the beginning of the sentence? Most people have the ability to concentrate. It's like a gnat, really. We're not, if we don't get something in the first.
Apparently it's less minutes, than goldfish. Human beings have less concentration ability than a goldfish now.
There you go. So everybody's like Dory, in Finding Nemo. That's it. And so we're forgetting things. If something doesn't grab you, then our imaginations and our thought processes are going to go somewhere else. And we often say that, if you're doing something, you've got to be more interesting than somebody's lunch or whatever if they're drinking a cup of coffee, you've got to be more interesting than that. So the only way of doing that is grabbing the imagination and getting into their heads in the way that biologically the brain actually needs to grasp information. Yeah. And the story is the best way of doing that, because we're making up stories about life all the time. The ABT is just, I'm such a fan. I think it's just, it's so simple. Well, it's so simple, and yet it is, to get it right.
Profound.
It's really profound, and you have to really work at it.
Maybe put you on the coaching spot for a minute, because I'm going to be your patient right now. I am redrafting a presentation about why the ABT works so well. And I think it's a lot like when you're writing your first chapter of a book or your first screenplay or whatever. You overwrite, you have too much stuff in there. It's not simple. You're trying to, get all of your thoughts down on paper, which I was doing and building out this deck. And now going through it, it's clunky and it's cumbersome, and it's everything you said, Sarah Jane. It's not simple, and I got to simplify. And what I'm trying to do is demonstrate that our brains are pattern-making machines. Yep. And if we don't close the story loop that we opened, our pattern-making machine brain is going to close that story loop for us, and it's not going to be the story we had intended unless we intentionally tell a story. So I first get in about this pattern thing going, and then I talk about the pandemic brain, which is very much of a real thing that people are just starting to talk about now, and about how that midbrain is hijacking our executive prefrontal cortex, using its energy to try to figure out what in the hell is going on in this chronic fight with the pandemic and all of the disinformation we get. So it's constantly battling to try to figure out, what do I do next in the background, totally automatic, eating up, chewing up the calories in our energy while it's affecting our executive functioning brain fog, distraction, hard time planning, disinterest, procrastinating, all that. And so we in sales are up against that if we've got a salesperson sitting across from us that has that pandemic brain. And we are not closing the loop in the story. We're losing them. So anyways, even this is getting complicated telling you that. Yeah. So my question to you is, I bring my deck into you. What would you tell me to do with that? I kind of have two competing narratives going now, the pattern-making brain and the pandemic brain.
It's a really interesting one, isn't it?
It is. And I know, because I have definitely suffered from pandemic brain. I have to really check constantly all the time what I'm doing because I realized that something happened to me the other day. Actually, it was about a couple of months ago. I went into London, I know London so well. I went there and I was at a particular tube station, and I had to look at the map to find out on the tube where I had to go to get to London Bridge. It's one stop on the Northern Line on the London tube. And I should have known that instantly without even having to think. And I had to look on the map. And I thought, oh my God, I'm just losing it completely. And so I started to talk about it to all my clients, and they were saying exactly the same thing, that they were having to check on things that normally would be a completely kind of the story in their head of that tube map is there all the time. It's completely natural that they could. More and more and more, I think it's really important to keep things simple.
I think that's the argument. I think that is. I think the two are connected. Actually, Park, when you mention it like that, is that the pandemic brain and the pattern matching brain, they are one and the same argument. And in some ways, it's an argument for even more simplicity, because you mentioned it before about the brain is having to use a lot of glucose up at the moment to actually just cope with life and just sort of get through, negotiate the day. If somebody sits in front of them and starts using, $5 words instead of 50-cent words, whoever that was Mark Twain. I think that was Mark Twain's thing, wasn't it? But I mean, I think that's the argument for simple structure, simple words, simple language, and is possibly even stronger now than it's ever been.
And the simple structure of the ABT. Let me try something on you, because this is part of the presentation too. Have you heard Ernest Hemingway's shortest story ever told in just 6 words?
Yeah.
And it goes like this: for sale, baby shoes, never worn.
Yeah.
Where does your mind go?
Well,
dead child.
Yes, of course.
But why?
Yeah.
Why? See how we had to close the story loop
Yeah.
and we catastrophized?
Yeah.
Because it was such a finite ending. Now, why didn't we end up with a husband comes home after work, happens to have purchased the exact same shoes his wife did that morning and couldn't return them, so he's selling them? Or young lady finds baby shoes in mint condition. She has no kids, so she's selling them to put herself through college. Or they get these baby shoes and they come home and they didn't anticipate how healthy and how fast growing their child was. Yeah. And the shoes didn't fit. None of those come to mind. We immediately go to the finality of death. So what happens? Yeah. Our pattern-making brain is exhausted by trying to figure out the ambiguity of the pandemic and is so exhausted, we don't finish the story for our customer. The customer is going to fill in the blank and finish the story for us. And it's probably going to be a worst-case scenario ending from their point of view.
Exactly.
That's the point that I mean. The ABT, what does it do? It opens the story that everybody has to do. You have to invite someone into an open story, but then you have to close the loop, the and, but, and therefore ensures that you do that.
That's so true. I've literally come back last night from my first trip to another country for about 2 years. I was in Spain with an organization who do sort of district cooling and heating, ecological cooling and heating systems in the north of Canada for heating systems, obviously, and then a lot in the Middle East. And they wanted some work around their ABT, as it turned out. Well, they said they wanted to use story. And then I actually pitched the ABT to them and they said, that sounds interesting, come out. And it was to actually, and they're launching something, it's a new project in Bahrain, for them to actually sort of, what essentially was probably about 100, and when we wrote it yesterday, day before yesterday, it probably worked out at about 102 words, which, let's say that's 35, 40 seconds of language, but it grabs people's attention, it closes that loop, it hooks people, it tells the relevance, it gives the context, and allows you to then tell possibly the longer what we would think of as traditional story about who was involved, when, where, what were the problems they were overcoming, what did they achieve. I think I said it to you. It's the Holy Grail. I think the ABT is the missing link, the Holy Grail, whatever you like. There's some magic in there.
I think as well that it's so important, because when you talk about the Ernest Hemingway thing, we see the picture. We actually see the picture.
We create the picture, don't we?
We do. We see these little shoes, and therefore we make this. But it has a massive emotional connection as well, because we're seeing the picture. We get this emotional hit on that. And I think that if you need to change anybody's mind or lead people in a different direction in order to change them on another path or whatever, you have to actually, they can't just kind of analyze it and understand it. They've got to actually emotionally buy into something. And that's why it's the power of the way in which the structure can change the way, because it works in the same way that our brains do in the way that we make decisions. And so many of our decisions are made, they're not really made on logic. They're made because of emotion, because they're linking in to previous situations where we felt safe. It's an emotional. We are an emotional species. That's what happens.
I think that negotiation thing you say there, Sarah Jane, is really interesting. I mean, once you learn about the ABT, you suddenly start seeing it everywhere. You see it everywhere in your life. I mean, immediately before this podcast, I mean, you have I'm about to speak to David and Sarah Jane, and I've got all of my plans ready for this podcast, but this guy's just turned up and started doing my internet. Therefore, I'd better email David and Sarah Jane and say I'm running 15 minutes late. I mean, life becomes a narrative ABT negotiation when you see it like that.
Let me add to that ABT. Then as Gene from CenturyLink is standing at my door, CenturyLink has promised me internet for 6 months, and I've been really excited about getting it up and running. But they've canceled on me 4 different times. Therefore, Gene is here today to actually hook it up. But Jane told me that now there's a $350 new charge of running their line across the road to my house that was never there before. Therefore, I got a little bit upset with Gene. But Gene reminded me I'm not the boss that makes that decision and that he is just there to get me hooked up. Therefore, I offered Gene a cup of coffee and said, whatever it takes, just get me my internet.
I love it. Life is a narrative negotiation.
It totally is. But therefore.
It's everywhere. It's everywhere.
Sarah Jane, you had just said earlier, too, if you can't see it, they can't see it. What does that mean from a storyteller's standpoint? And how do you coach people to be able to see it?
Well, I think is it's a lot of what we do. I mean, and it's a case of constantly asking people, well, put yourself. Tell me what happened at that event. And how are you feeling when that happened? What was the situation when that happened? And get them to imagine themselves back there. And then I think that as soon as they do that, they can imagine. You see, a lot of it is about imagining how they felt. So as soon as you say, last week I walked into the office and I realized that we had this situation going on, and I felt, oh my God, what are we going to do? As soon as you say that, everybody can relate to it. Then there will be the but. I realized I talked to so-and-so, you have the story, I talked to so-and-so and they sat down and we had a cup of coffee and we decided that we would make this decision or whatever. I mean, I'm not telling a very good story now, but it's just the way in which, and the sitting down and having the cup of coffee is a picture that people can see and relate to and understand, and it tells you a lot about the situation. It says that somebody was concerned about it. It says somebody was concerned about the situation. Somebody shared that with somebody else. There's a lot of information that goes on in that story in terms of the way that this person who is speaking relates and acts. And it's giving the listener a lot of information about the sort of person that you are, if you see what I mean. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And I think that within that, within any story, you're not just giving the facts about something, you're revealing, particularly when you talk about things, that incidents where you actually talk about how you felt about something. You are revealing a lot about yourself, and it may not be as particularly open or deliberate, but there are things that, because of the way, again, that human beings, they sense. They sense the sort of person you are. And so through a story, we can give all sorts of hints.
You did it just then, actually. I mean, it's really interesting with that story about Jean at the door. Yeah. I mean, it was, you could have done the ABT on that, and it was just this happened, but then this happened, therefore this happened. But suddenly there was a little drop down into detail of Jean saying, I'm not the boss who makes the decisions. And so I said to him, listen, whatever it takes to get this internet connected. You drop down into, Kindra Hall calls it moments. Bobette Buster calls it the gleaming details. It's those little moments that sort of add the spice to the story. And actually, as Sarah Jane said, a lot of our work is getting people, once they've actually structured the story, it's getting them to drop down into the appropriate moments that are going to sit in the room for a long, long time afterwards. And, and so the story becomes, that story then gets told to other people because, we met this guy this morning. He told us about this conversation with this guy called Gene, or, who had a cup of coffee and got the internet sorted out after all these years, rather than just this happened, but this happened, therefore this happened.
And I think as well that makes me think that actually that if you have a good story that you want to go viral, it has to be a story, because stories do go viral because people remember them, because they can see them in their heads and they have an emotional connection to it, and they also can see the pictures, and therefore they remember it really easily. Whereas a bunch of facts nobody remembers because our minds aren't made like that.
So a good story is immensely scalable, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's not just in the telling, it's also how you show up. And I think you do some coaching on that too, of how you own that room.
Yeah, and that I think is so important, because you, no matter how good your story, if you just mumble it at the front of the room or whatever, you're not going to get anywhere. And I think that's the other thing. We do a lot of coaching on that, because the two go hand in hand, which is the story that you tell by your behaviors. So how you invest in that story, how you for a start look like you want to be there. Look like you actually want to be talking to the people that you are talking to and connect with them. So I think that's hugely important. But the interesting thing is that when you're telling a story, it is easier to do that because of the fact that you have these kind of points where you can, for instance, express the emotion about how you're feeling, or describe something that happened, and that will come out in your face or your body language. It's easier to do. But a lot of people need urging, I would say, don't they, to do that? I think
you actually gave me one of the best pieces of advice, coaching tips, actually, when I first started doing this with you, in terms of that question. Ask people, why is it them telling this story, and why is it them telling this story now? So that sort of, it becomes, anyone can tell a story, but why is it you, and why does it need to be told right now? So it gives it a purpose, and it makes them invest in how they feel about the story, which will change the language. It will change the energy that they bring to it as well. And there are tricks you can do, but the reality is, if you really want to tell it, and you really want to tell it now, then the skills will show up. That's the best way.
And I think as well, the wonderful thing I love about the ABT, just in terms of conversation, or when you really need to connect with an audience or with somebody that you're speaking to, is the and is about, I love it because it's about seeking connection. And it's about what can we agree with. And I was working with somebody yesterday, in fact, and she was showing me a video of, she'd been doing a presentation to quite a big forum. And the forum was quite dull, I have to say, and lots of people were doing that. And so they were all reading their whatever they were saying just from a piece of paper. And I said, well, why that isn't working is that you haven't listened, you're not listening to what people have said before and connecting with what they've said. So you could spend a lot longer introducing what you're saying by actually connecting, and it was interesting. John, when you were saying X, Y, and Z, and
get the agreement.
So you get the agreement from the audience at the beginning, which will mean when they know that they have been heard themselves, they are more likely to listen to you.
Then you pull the rug out with the butt.
Then you pull the rug out with the butt. Exactly.
The complication.
Yes. But it's surprising how much sometimes you need to do the and before, really work at that. Because it gains consensus and people will want to listen if you acknowledge what people have said. And
have I been understood?
Yeah, exactly.
It validates them. There's a validation to that and get this agreement.
Yeah.
And there are so many storytellers now. You can read them all out there. People pitch advices and saying the only way that you're going to grab people's attention is if you say something shocking or surprising, because that's what the brain will listen to. But there is an element of truth in that, of course, which is why the but is in there. And you better make that a really big but as well. Do you know, there's a wonderful book by a guy is it Brian Grazer called Face to Face. It's about, he's a Hollywood producer. He's Ron Howard's producer.
Right.
I think you read this
Glazer,
book.
yeah.
Glazer, Brian Glazer, that's right. And he tells the story in there about Oprah Winfrey. And she says that the one question she gets asked at the end of every interview, it could be a miner from Kentucky, it could be, Prince Harry, whatever. Everyone always says, was that okay? Because we all have an inherent need as human beings to feel that we've been understood. And the and is like, yeah, we understand you and did, but the whole thing is, well, yeah, we love it.
I had an interesting thing happen yesterday. I was going through this presentation and sharing it with a few people, and I shared it with our son, Parker, who went to film school at Chapman University, and he's been in Hollywood, and he directs a lot of mixed reality and virtual reality films now. And I was walking him through it, and he was helping me, saying, yeah, Dad, it's too complicated. I would move the Hemingway thing up. I would slide this. I would get rid of these over here. So it was really good insight from an outsider looking in. But then he told me a story that I had never heard before. And he goes, Dad, I remember when I was in kindergarten here in America. I was in kindergarten, and they brought in this guy that talked about storytelling and how you can write a little story. And he talked about basically the ABT. He didn't call it that, but he goes, I remember it distinctly. He said, you set the scene, and then you create story tension. And you want to hold on to that tension as long as you can to have your audience sit at the edge of their seat saying, tell us, how does it end? How does it end? And then you deliver the conclusion. And he started laughing. And he goes, Dad, that's the ABT. He was teaching the ABT when I was in kindergarten. But to me, did you see how it stuck in his brain?
Absolutely.
That was probably the very first thing, he heard that says, I think I want to go make movies or be in the storytelling business in one way.
Oh, how wonderful.
But it goes back to that pattern recognition machine our brain is. The and sets it up. The B then pulls the rug out from underneath it, the but, the problem. And our brain says, you have to conclude this for me, the therefore. And what happens in business is sometimes you'll show up with just all ands, which is nothing but exposition. And we bore our audience to death. Or you don't do the and, you show up right with the but. Let's get right to the problem, but you haven't set the stage. So there's no tension in that problem other than, you're right, that's kind of a problem. So you're not creating that open story that starts to create the pattern that you are going to now close for your audience. Or worse, some people just jump right to the therefore. There is no
They
and.
do.
There is no but. And let me just sell you something. That's where
It's
this
so
ABT
true.
is so strong.
And the interesting thing is, it sort of can't be any other word. I mean, it could be pero in Spanish, it could be aber in German or whatever. But I mean, with these guys, they were trying to be clever the other day and said, "Oh, do we really need to use but? Maybe we could do however, or maybe we can just leave it out and it be implied," and it doesn't work. There's something about the word "but" that stops people in the. We both did a lot of improvisation, which is a lot of yes anding, and you never do yes but it's such a strong and it almost tells you to pause at that moment as well. We did a big conference with a client of ours about 3 or 4 weeks ago now, when all of their exco were coming up with ideas, and we taught them the ABT structure in quite a short amount of time. So they got the basics of it. But when they were presenting their ideas, it was like it was scripted for them. All of them went, "We did this and this and this, but we have this problem here," and without even telling them to, they paused and emphasized there. It almost told them how to perform their script.
From your theater background, is it safe to say the but is the plot shift? That you're moving along, but whoa, now the audience has woken up. Now you got something else going on, and it's a problem that needs to be solved.
Yeah.
In screenwriting terms, it's the break into Act 2, isn't it? It's like, absolutely.
It really is.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Last question for you here. You are called the Story Spotters. How do you go about spotting stories, and how do you teach your customers how to spot stories so they can do it for themselves?
I'll answer from my perspective first off. I think that we've been doing this for so many years. We said to our son the other day, he was down here for the weekend, and I said to him, "Do you know," his name's Charlie. I said, "Charlie, I sometimes feel like Haley Joel Osment in The Sixth Sense. I don't see dead people, I see stories." It's like, and it's like, I can't help it. I don't think either of us can help it, because we've just been doing it for so many years. You can teach people to spot the things like the time, the place, the character, the problem, the struggle, the challenge to overcome that, which will start helping them to spot their own stories. But I think for us, I mean, I don't think we could do anything else, could we? I mean, it's like we're certainly not trained for anything else.
Completely useless at doing anything else. One of the things that I think, because we do quite a lot of leadership coaching, and a big thing for me is saying to people, you have to really be curious about everything. Because curiosity is the most important thing, and thinking, oh, that's interesting. And having that kind of mind that will find what's interesting about stuff. And when you're talking to people, is not thinking about what am I going to say next, but being interested in what they're saying. I thought, well, really? You went down the Zambezi? You got to tell me more about that. And I think it's like it's the willingness to put yourself on the back burner and be really curious about what's going on and find it fascinating. I find people fascinating. And once you start to ask questions or be curious about what's going on, that's when you get the stories.
Yeah,
and that's why we call ourselves the story spotters.
Maybe we should actually tell people to look for the buts in their day.
Yeah,
because we all wake up thinking it's going to go one way, but something happens. There's the stories.
Look for the buts in your day. So that's all well and good, but I know we have listeners right now saying, Sarah Jane, I don't have any stories. Nobody wants to hear my stories. I'm boring. And I know, I'm sure you have executives come and say the same thing to you. It's an excuse to get out of having to tell a story. What do you do when somebody says, Sarah Jane, I have no stories?
Well, I think that's during the course of any conversation that you have with someone, there is always something that you can ask, tell me more about that. God, when you said such and such, tell me more about that. And then they will go into some more detail. And then you say, really? And then you can pick up something. Really? 3 cats? Tell me. So you've got 3 cats? That's interesting. Tell me about, I've got a cat too. Engage and continue, or whatever it may be that they're saying. And the more that you can do that, I mean, you have to work hard, because I think one of the most important things I think that I do is listen. To be curious, you have to listen really, really well. And one of the things that I do a lot is I play back somebody's words verbatim back. So if somebody has said something, I will say, when you said, and then I will say what they've said, because that's something, then that triggers something for them, this feeling of being heard. And then you can kind of go further down into the conversation. And always, 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 people do open up about something that they felt in a particular conversation that they've had, or something that's troubling them, or about whatever they're doing at the moment. And I think that that's probably the most important thing, is just put yourself aside and be focused and curious.
Be curious about yourself. Exercise the muscle. I mean, I'm just thinking now, actually, I mean, there are sort of exercises we've done in the past. You might give people a list of things like first kiss or weekend job or something like that. And, tell me about that. But actually finding the but in there. Why didn't it work out? Why wasn't that first kiss as great as you thought it might be? Or why did you get fired from that weekend job? My head is awash with images from my life now. But I mean, I think actually just becoming curious about yourself is, favorite pet, all sorts of things like that. I mean, but always find the but.
Yeah. That's a great way to think about it. And if anyone is sitting there and is a bit shy about their stories, just go back to those moments. I'm a big believer in moments too, when everything changed. All of a sudden, you didn't see it coming, or a surprising but that led to this curiosity that you talk about, that took you down a rabbit hole you never thought you would find any interest in, only to become that in your career or whatever. There are always these moments. I did a TEDx talk, TEDx Gilbert, and it was called, Stop Looking for Your Story and Find Your Scenes. Those scenes, those moments that have informed who you are today, knit those scenes together and your story will find you. And I think that's kind of what we're talking about here.
Everybody has them. To be human is to have stories. And there are so many that one can share, because they're great. If you've been through some sort of experience, it's great to share it, because it will benefit someone else.
The Story Spotters give all of your listeners full permission to tell their stories, Bob.
All right. With that, where can people spot the Story Spotters? Where can they find out more about the work you do?
Well, we have a website, of course, www.thestoryspotters.com. We're both on LinkedIn, and we have a page on LinkedIn for the Story Spotters as well, which we put quite a lot of information. We post once or twice a week with tips about storytelling on there. We have a very, very underused Twitter account at the Story Spotters.
It's very entertaining. David puts up so many different videos, which are extremely entertaining, and I encourage everybody to watch them.
Or come to Winnie the Pooh country, have a cup of tea with us, and we'll talk story to you.
There we go. We've brought it full circle. I'll bring the honey. Well, thank you both for being here. I mean, it's just been such a delight to get to know you over the last couple of months and host you here on the Business of Story. Love the work you're doing out there. And, we are comrade in arms when it comes down to the power of the ABT.
For sure. Definitely. Absolutely.
Thank you.
And thank you. It's been such fun, Park. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, your internet has held up, which is marvelous.
Well, I got to go make another cup of coffee for Gene out there and keep it working. So, with that, I'm going to sign off and thank all of you for listening to this scattered edition of the Business of Story that did hold together through the internet. Thank you, CenturyLink. Fingers crossed. If I can be of service to you, visit me over at businessofstory.com. And if you haven't yet purchased your book, The Narrative Gym for Business, that I co-authored with Dr. Randy Olson, the gentleman who revealed the ABT to me back in 2013, By all means, go to Amazon right now, pick up your copy. You can get a print or Kindle version now. And of course, I've got a companion online course called The ABTs of Selling. And in under 18 minutes, through 3 very short videos, I take you through the and, through the but, through the therefore, and I provide some Story Quest exercises for you to start writing your ABTs immediately. And I even invite you to send me your first one. I will coach you, no additional cost, via emails, and you can send that to park@businessofstory.com. You can find the online course at businessofstory.thinkific.com, or in the show notes, there's a link there to it, as well as Sarah Jane's and Dave's contact information, websites, and so forth. So check that out. And until next week, when we will have another story artist here, just for you, remember that the most potent story you'll ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make it a great one. Thanks so much for listening.